Our speaker today is Dr. Daniel Gribbin. Dan is a retired college professor, singer, songwriter, and guitarist, nature photographer specializing in Florida shorebirds, and he recently released a book of short stories, Fast Friends, Tales of Remarkable Friendship. And it is always an honor and a delight to welcome him back.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Joe speaks so swiftly that I want to demonstrate that I was listening carefully. The cat's name is Mr. Gray, is that correct?
Yes.
Good. Denise Dale was your friend who worked with you in demonstrating across from Starbucks. I'm going to remember them. I'm not going to dedicate the talk to Mr. Gray, but I mean, exactly, yeah. Yeah, we're fortunate in Daytona Beach that we feel as if the police are there to serve and to protect us when we demonstrate, which is fairly often at City Hall. It's been a week where you could become afraid for our republic. And I would recommend a YouTube video in which Thich Nhat Hanh speaks about fear, dealing with fear. I just happened upon it because in a short story that I was writing, a character realized that the other character was practically going into a cocoon of protection against fear. Went online to see, and there was Thich Nhat Hanh. He will settle us down, believe me, he will settle us down. I'll begin my talk by taking you back to when I was young. So this is the early to mid 1950s. Most of you, that's a leap of faith to try to go back that far, I know, but television was young in the early 1950s. The black and white TV in our living room, I think it measured 12 inches diagonal. You know, they would talk about a 12-inch TV, but that was a diagonal, so it wasn't even a 12-inch TV. To picture that today, you would have to turn off the color on your laptop and sit it across the room from you and then try to watch it, you know, and that would be what it was like watching that 12-inch TV. And corporate America was just beginning to explore the profitable ways to exploit television at that point. With the commercials look a little bit simplified compared to what we see today, probably. But one thing they were doing a lot of was marketing to kids. And so most of the radio programs that a kid would listen to, and I did listen to a lot of radio programs, made the transition over to TV, including Hopalong Cassidy, who was really my favorite. And Kukla, Fran, and Ollie. Isn't it interesting that that was a primetime network TV show, and it was a puppet show. But the one that I can remember really, because I was sort of participating in it, was Captain Midnight. This was probably on Saturday mornings that we did this. And they would advertise this product called Ovaltine. It sounds made up, but that was the name of the product. So you had these chocolate crystals. It was like instant coffee, but it was chocolate. And you put it into your milk, and it didn't dissolve very well, but you worked at it. I don't remember liking Ovaltine very well, but if you were going to get the Captain Midnight decoder ring and a sheet that said that you were part of the group, then you had to send in the little wax label, the little thing on top that kept it fresh. And that made you a Captain Midnight Video Ranger. So this was TV, not radio. And so you saw the little kid, he received his kit, and you wanted to be him. And that's the way that worked. Well, I mention this because club membership was a big part of the whole advertising shtick to kids in those days. And here we are, a room full of UU members who were sort of like the Captain Video Rangers of our day. We're members of this club, aren't we? And it's a good club, and we're so happy to be members of it. What's in our membership kit, though? That's what I'd like to talk about today, because, I talked to you last time about the history and William Ellery Channing and Ralph Waldo Emerson and so on. But there's a little more to it. What have we gotten ourselves into? What club is this that we're involved in? What is our heritage? Not just our history, but our heritage. But we will go over the bare facts. In 1961, the two groups merged, and the Unitarians and the Universalists. We have more than 1,000 present-day congregations in the United States. That's interesting, isn't it? More than 1,000 congregations. I think our friend Russ, who went up to Minnesota because he's going to be living up there soon, said that there are 3 major Unitarian churches in Minneapolis. Some of you may be able to verify that, but that's really interesting to me. 150,000 members of Unitarian churches in America today. We're not alone. You know about the mothership in Boston, where things kind of got started up there. And worldwide, think about what you would estimate as the number of Unitarians worldwide. It's 800,000. So that's a pretty good number. We have never found a Unitarian church in France. I'm sorry to say, but other places, the count is 800,000. All right, now we're going to find it next time. Then I'd like to go there on a Sunday morning. Now we talked about William Ellery Channing last time. He sort of shifted us away from Puritan-based Unitarian practice, such as limited atonement, scriptural infallibility, and the characterization of Jesus as a God to be worshipped, which has characterized other denominations. Channing believed in the spiritual journey, and I think we do too, typically. We're part of a spiritual journey, individually and collectively. Granted free will to do so by God. It's our unencumbered right to seek the truth. And then Channing emphasized that the Bible is a source, but not the source. And Jesus is a guide, but not the guide, that sort of thing. So where does Margaret Fuller fit into all this? Because I know that she was part of that group, that transcendental group. And part of the move toward a more liberal sort of worship in Universalist and Unitarian New England. Well, it turns out that the nephew of William Ellery Channing was William Henry Channing, and he was the chief editor of a memoir that they created out of the diaries that were fished out of the Atlantic when the shipwreck took the lives of Margaret Fuller, her husband, and her child. And those diaries ended up being Baudelarized to a certain extent. In other words, Channing and the other editors saw things there that they thought she might not have wanted to have included in the memoir, or they saw things that they thought people probably shouldn't think about her. So at any rate, it was heavily redacted, as the term is now. But William Henry Channing edited this memoir, and you can actually access it, the Baudelarized version, on the Gutenberg project. Some of you probably use that to access older books. I just got the Library of America volume that is the collected works of Margaret Fuller. It was on sale, just as a convenience to me, as far as I could tell. Now they took those edited diaries and actually figured out how to get the real diaries to us. So that would be the way to go, I think, if you want to read more on Margaret Fuller, is to get the Library of America volume. But here's Channing, William Henry Channing, on the subject of liberalizing traditional Unitarianism. He writes, on the somewhat stunted stock Unitarianism, whose characteristic dogma was trust in individual reason as a correlative to spiritual supreme wisdom, trust in reason was an emphasis, has been grafted German idealism, capital I, as taught by masters of various schools. And the result was a vague yet exalting conception of the godlike nature of the human spirit. Transcendentalism, as viewed by its disciples, was a pilgrimage from the idolatrous world of creeds and rituals. That seems like a slant reference to Catholicism, doesn't it? Okay, so Transcendentalism, as viewed by its disciples, was a pilgrimage from the idolatrous world of creeds and rituals to the temple of the living God in the soul. Amidst materialists, zealots, and skeptics, the Transcendentalists believed in perpetual inspiration, the miraculous power of will, and a birthright to universal good. He sought to hold communion face to face with the unnameable spirit of his spirit, and gave himself up to the embrace of nature's beautiful joy as a babe seeks the breast of a mother. To him, the curse seemed past, and love was without fear. His work was to be faithful to truth as the very word of God. His maxims were trust, dare, and be. Infinite good is ready for your asking. Seek and find. All that your fellows can claim or need is that you should become, in fact, your highest self. Fulfill, then, your ideal. So that was just William Henry Channing saying this was the transition. This is what we transitioned to. And I like the way he put all of that. That was inspirational. So the people who met at Emerson's home, the Transcendental Society, were basically using that as their creed, their background. And much of what I just read is pretty familiar to us today as Unitarian practice. Our language might be somewhat less exalted than what William Henry Channing used, but we affirm most of that on a weekly basis. Seeking the truth, for example. The importance of clinging to basic truths is brought home to us every day in the horrible fog of lies that is being spread by people at the highest level of our government and their followers on social media. To focus on seeking the truth is a full-time job in America today, isn't it? But consider, too, that various religious denominations have attempted to concretize truths. They fix the truths. When you talk about seeking truth, you're talking about a process, a continuous process. Think about those fixed documents like the Apostles' Creed. That in itself drove me out of organized Christianity. If I stood here and gave you the Apostles' Creed, you'd say, huh? It stuck in my craw, and it probably stuck in the craw of those people in New England in the 1830s too. It's like faith, but it's attached to a stake pounded into the ground like a dog that can't go beyond that little circle, you know. And the Unitarian faith is more like a wide-ranging, constant search for truth that allows us to move out of that circle. I'll give you a little background of how Martha and I got involved. Our Sunday mornings, it'd been a few years that we had been living in the Daytona Beach area, and Martha's friend needed a sub on Sunday mornings at the boutique at the luxury hotel across the street from us. And so Martha was working there, and it was a nice place to work and good people and so on. So our Sunday mornings were basically Martha goes to work and Dan sits and reads or something of that sort. And then we had a wedding in the family, and we got to know Bud Murphy, who was the pastor at our Ormond Beach church, and he presided over the wedding. That was August 2000, or the beginning of August 2004. And then the hurricanes began to hit. Martha's a great planner, and she planned that wedding before the hurricanes. She just knew how that was going to work. And so Hurricane Francis wiped out the luxury hotel across the street from us. It was lying between them and us was most of the hotel that morning when I got out to take a walk. So Bud Murphy had said at that little dinner that we had the night before the wedding, he had said, you might want to come to our open mic on Wednesday nights at the church. And I had done so in the intervening period, met some nice people, did a little music. And I asked Martha, why don't we go to church on Sunday morning and see what it's like at the Unitarian Church? So I don't remember Bud's sermon that first morning, and that's no reflection on him. It's, it was quite a while ago, but I do remember that when the congregation recited the covenant, it was like my being able to say, Mr. Gray and Denise, what's her last name? Dale. Okay, Denise Dale. See, I listened, but but I did listen to that covenant, and the covenant talked about love, service, dwelling together in peace and freedom, seeking the truth, and helping one another. And I walked out of there thinking, to seek the truth and to help one another, boy, that sounds like a good group. I'd like to be a part of that. So I'd been in a lot of church services in my life. My mother kind of pushed me into getting baptized in a Baptist church, and that was the most bizarre. If you go to College Park, there's a Baptist church in College Park near Winter Park. Sunday afternoon at 3:00, it was like a fish tank that they dumped me into and pulled me back out. There were no supporting hymns being done or people there or anything like that. I still shake my head at that I did that. But to dwell together in peace and freedom, seek the truth and to help one another, wouldn't you just love to bottle that and inject it into the body politic right now? To dwell together in peace and freedom, to seek the truth and to help one another. Boy, our country needs that right now. And it's certainly comforting to know that we can practice those principles as a group on Sunday mornings. Now, to speak of Margaret Fuller, I'm going to rely a little bit on William Henry Channing and that memoir that they produced, because he presents her as the most remarkable person he has ever been around. She was a key member of that Transcendentalist Society that met at Emerson's house. And if you remember, Channing Ellery Channing stayed away because he didn't want to be overly influential, because he was a pretty big celebrity as a preacher. But here she was as a proponent of women's rights on the outrageous premise that women are as capable of men of significant thought and action. What an outrageous premise that was. So here's what Channing writes. Of this group, she was a member by grace of nature. Her romantic freshness of heart, her craving for the truth, her self-trust had prepared her from childhood to be a pioneer in prairie land. And her discipline in German schools of thought is what I think he means there, had given definite form and tendency to her idealism. Her critical yet aspiring intellect filled her with longing for germs of positive affirmation in place of the chaff of thrice sifted negation. That sounds a lot like Emerson saying, we're given the bones of the past. Why can't we have our own worship? So he talks about the chaff of thrice sifted negation. She has a longing for germs of positive affirmation. Her aesthetic instinct responded in accord to the praise of beauty as the beloved heir of good and truth, whose right it is to reign. On the other hand, strong common sense saved her from becoming visionary, while she was too well read as a scholar to be caught by conceits, and had been too sternly tried by sorrow to fall into fanciful effeminacy. We could quibble with him about the word effeminacy there, but I do think he was trying to say that she stayed firm and didn't sort of dissolve when big issues, difficult issues hit her. So that Margaret Fuller was an exceptional person seems pretty obvious. And Channing goes on to say, it was evident that men prized her verdict, respected her criticism, feared her rebuke, and looked to her as an umpire. I don't think baseball was a big deal in the 1830s, so this was a broader interpretation of the word umpire. But he's saying men looked to her for all of these good qualities. Very observable was it also how in side talks, the men became confidential, seemed to glow and brighten into their best mood, and poured out in full measure what they but scantily hinted in the circle at large. So they had a coffee hour after the meetings, obviously, and then people pulled her aside and talked with her. Talked about things that they were shy about bringing up in the meeting itself. So we can see, amidst Channing's effusive praise, Margaret Fuller's essential contribution to the Transcendental movement and to American thought was pretty strong. She's been described as America's first female public intellectual. Just as an aside, we had a replacement minister for 2 years, and he said that his father had been a minister and that his goal in life from the time he was young was to become a public intellectual. And I thought, huh? I'm probably a public intellectual. I'm 80 years old. That's fine. But when I was 12 years old, I wasn't thinking, you know what I want to become in life? Public intellectual. But I value the idea that Margaret Fuller is being described as America's first female public intellectual. She was also the editor of The Dial, which was the magazine that for 2 years, I don't know how many issues, the Transcendentalists published. It was a publication that articulated the values of the Transcendentalists. And She published an article in the Dial in 1843 that she then expanded upon. And in 1845 came out her volume, Women in the 19th Century. Now that is also available on Gutenberg, the Gutenberg Project, and it's pretty interesting. So this is America's first feminist work, arguing for full equality between men and women, and I think probably worth taking a look at. Now, there are arguments against transcendental thinking. Something leveled at Emerson in particular was that it emphasizes positive personal growth without taking into account the evil of the world. I don't think that charge is particularly well-founded. I think we are willing to face the evil of the world. And I think about Thich Nhat Hanh when I think about someone who professes positively, but has faced the evil in the world. We spent a week at a conference where he spoke each day. So we heard him on 4 different occasions. We heard him, and it seemed as if he could talk as long as he wanted to, and everybody there, hundreds of people would want to hear more. And then he spoke in the Boston Opera House. We went into town then, and he spoke on that Saturday night as well. But he could captivate a large field house full of people by just talking about his experience. He had been part of a movement when he was really quite young to try to reestablish Buddhism in Vietnam. And ultimately what happened was the Vietnamese government, the South Vietnamese government, decided they were just going to wipe out the monks. They were going to wipe out the Buddhist monks. There was a Molotov cocktail thrown into the room where he was, and he got out of there in time to survive it and escaped. And then he and Sister Chan Kong, his wonderful right-hand woman, they would take supplies up the river to villages that needed food and clothing and so on, making themselves easy targets. They did that for quite some time. And then he was labeled persona non grata by the government and had to escape to Hong Kong and eventually to France. But what did he do then? He looked the Vietnam War in the eye, set up Plum Village in France, and worked for the healing of American GIs who had experienced that war. And you know what that did to so many of them, including my brother. They didn't come back in any sense the same people they went over as. I think Thich Nhat Hanh is a wonderful example of somebody who professes positivity, and faces the evil of the world directly. So let me just conclude a little bit on a personal note again. I've been very thankful in my lifelong spiritual journey that it's left me open to respond favorably to my initial exposure to universalism, Unitarian Universalism, when we went to church that day, to Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings when we went. Martha was so surprised, I think. She said, Thich Nhat Hanh's giving this retreat. I said, what are the dates? She came back in and said, da-da-da-da. I said, sign us up. Blowing her mind. And we went, but we thought it was going to be a small group kind of thing. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people then. But to respond to the covenant of this church, to take advantage of the opportunity to experience mindfulness and all that we can learn in a place like this, it's a miracle, really. And if I was trying to sum up the stages in my journey, and probably yours might be something like this too. First, questioning received dogma. You're brought up in a certain church, and then you start asking questions. Embracing a personal approach to these ultimate matters that are taught in churches. I have my own way of looking at this, that takes courage, when you're young especially. Then seeking the truth in community. There are so many great advantages to that. And ultimately refining your approach to spirituality by being willing to declare your beliefs and shape them through contact with what you read and other people that you come in contact with. I can remember when I was in a group and there was a workshop at the college. So this is a workshop among faculty members and staff members, part of an effort to give us more of a liberal outlook on each other. And they said each person was going to go around the circle and say what they believed. And of course, 99% of them were Christians who went to the Methodist church. Well, I went to that Methodist church on campus too, but I said, I'm a Transcendentalist. And then you've got to sit there and have these people looking at you as if you came in from Mars to that meeting. But it takes some courage, I think. And I think I can speak for Martha in saying that we're really grateful for the kind of nurturing that our Unitarian congregations provide for us in our contact with you as well as our own, If the road to hell is paved with good intentions, you've probably heard that, perhaps the road to enlightened living is paved with the good thoughts and good wishes of our fellow UU Video Rangers. It would be fun to call ourselves that. Thich Nhat Hanh says heaven is not some distant promise of some painful place that we go to, but it's with us every moment that we live mindfully. This is heaven, people. And that's not too hard to recognize, is it? So I have a little something that I collaborated with Thich Nhat Hanh on, and he doesn't know that we collaborated. But I used it as the chorus of a song called Awakening that I wrote. I'll sing it and then I'll ask you to join me in singing it again. I have arrived, I am home, I am here, peace is now. I have arrived, I am home, peace is now. Let's sing it one more time now. I have arrived, I am home, I am here, peace is now. I have arrived, I am home, peace is now. It's good to be with you this morning.